All right. And can you see the closed captioning at the bottom? Is that working?
No, I can't.
I don't,
No.
I don't see it, no.
Okay. Hold on for just a second. I had that on. And let me stop the share for a second. That might make it easier for me to find it. How is that? Nope. Here we go. There we go. It's on a little bit of a delay. Okay. Well, welcome again, and thank you for joining us. My name is Melissa Salazzo, and I am with State Support Team 13 in Region 13, which encompasses Butler, Claremont, Hamilton, and Warren counties. And we are partnering this year with Cincinnati Public Schools. They did a parent series in the previous years called Tool Talks, and just wanted to broaden their horizon a little bit and get a few more people to attend. So we decided to work together to get some great topics out there to share with our families. So I did put a link in the chat if you wouldn't mind signing in. It's just so we can show how many people we're able to reach. And I promise not to spam you. The other thing I'd like to show you is our Padlet. Did the screen switch for you? Okay. So the Padlet is where we're holding our minutes or our notes or anything our speakers share with us during the presentation, slide decks, and then that's also where the recording will be uploaded. So if you missed the link or you missed the last time, September 5th is here. There's the recording at the top, and then the things that the speakers talked about, the evaluation roadmap, some different things, how to find our parent mentors, and out if you have questions. So I'll put the link to the Padlet here in the chat as well. All right, if you're not familiar with Zoom, feel free to reach out to me in the messages in the chat. You can message me directly by clicking on that arrow where it says next to everyone. You can click the down arrow and you can find me, Melissa, and then ask me a question and I'll do my best to help troubleshoot anything you might be having. You're welcome to turn your camera on. We'd love to see you. Here's where you can turn your mic on and off if you want to ask a question. We're a pretty small group, so feel free to ask questions in the chat. And then if we need clarification, we'll ask you to unmute so we can help you get your answer. Sorry. So we'd love for you to just keep an open mind about topics and things you might hear. And we're all about sharing information and giving you some things to think about. And then our presenters are taking their time in the evening. So be as respectful as possible. And then, of course, ask questions. That's what this is all about. So we want to help you with anything you've got going on and lead you to new resources you might not know about or help you solve an issue. So feel free to ask questions as we go along. So for tonight's topic, it is supported decision-making. And with us, we have Courtney Hineman from the Butler County Board of Developmental Disabilities and Josh Young from the Ohio Network for Innovation. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to them and let them introduce themselves. And then they'll just take it from here.
Great, thank you. Let's get the slides going and we'll get started. All right. Can you all see voice choice and control, but nothing else?
Yep.
Awesome, thank you. So Melissa did some introductions. I'll just add a couple things. Courtney, you can add anything that you want. My name is Josh Young, and I'm the Director of Operations for ONI, the Ohio Network for Innovation. And I see some familiar faces in this space, which is always nice. But we do a lot of stuff. Most of what we do is all around decision making, helping people understand their options, think about pros and cons, advocate for making as many of their own decisions as possible. Courtney, you want to tell me a little bit about you or Butler Didi?
Yeah, so my name is Courtney Hineman. I work with the Butler County Board of Developmental Disabilities, and I'm the community outreach advocate. So I co-lead our self-advocacy group. It's called Speak Up, and I attend and present at community events, and I also serve on some different committees and stuff like that for the board. So that's what I do.
Great. So Courtney and I presented on this topic many, many times. We both think it's pretty important. So we're glad to see and have you all here tonight so you can hear it and discuss it as well. What we do in this short amount of time is kind of an abbreviated version. Going to give you the basic concepts, maybe go a bit quickly, but give you some impactful things to think about later. And then if you do want to know more, we are certainly available for questions and things like that. One other caveat before we get started, what we're talking about today, supported decision-making, is being talked about a lot around the world, in the country, in the state of Ohio. So participating in this, buying into it, practicing it is really an opportunity to get ahead of the curve, which I think you'll see in a little bit here. All right, we start with a video. It's short, and we're going to watch it, come back, and talk about some of the main points. ONI, the Ohio Network for Innovation. Hey, parents and family members. Today, we want to talk to you because we know that you want the very best for your son or daughter or loved one, and that you want to do your best to help them live a good life. We also know that you can have a lot of questions about how things work or what your options are, especially as your loved one gets older and closer to becoming an adult. And one of those questions is what to do when your child turns 18, because chances are you still want to be involved in their life, help them make decisions, and make sure they aren't taken advantage of. Now, you might have heard from a lot of other people that guardianship is the answer, but guardianship is really meant to be a last resort, something that's used when other less restrictive options aren't available. See, guardianship is actually the removal of a person's right to make decisions about their life. And while guardianship might seem like the protective thing to do, it can have a profound and lasting impact on a person. In fact, there are studies that say that people without guardians are more likely to live independently, be included in their communities, and have their rights respected. So if guardianship isn't always the best way, then what else is there? Well, there are actually a lot of other less restrictive options. In fact, too many to explore in this short video. They just haven't been talked about a lot, which is what we're trying to change. Now, all of this is part of a movement towards supported decision-making, which is all about helping people learn and practice decision-making skills so they have more choice and control in their lives. Because it turns out people are happier and more successful that way. We want you to know that you have options that might be better for helping your loved one live a good life. So before you make a decision about guardianship, take some time to explore less restrictive options. We'll be glad to help you. All right. So again, we're going to revisit a little bit of what was talked about in the video, but what I want to say before we go any further is what we're not saying is that guardianship is never the best way to support someone with decision making. Sometimes it is. We've just found that a lot of people don't understand the limitations on guardianship or what it actually entails, or that there are a lot of other less restrictive alternatives that can be used in place of or alongside of guardianship. So this is just about helping people understand what their options and what alternatives are so they can make an informed decision. So if someone is considering guardianship or they already have guardianship, it does not mean that they did something bad or wrong. We just want to give people as much information as possible. So the video talked about guardianship being the legal removal of a person's right to make decisions about their life. So we got to remember that. And because that's such a serious thing, guardianship is intended to be the last resort after we've tried these less restrictive alternatives. The other thing to know is that once guardianship is established, it can be really difficult to reverse. Not impossible, but it doesn't happen often. Most of the time, guardianship ends when the person who's under guardianship dies. So if we think about that for a minute, we're kind of making a judgment about a person, often when they're very young, and it literally sticks with them for the rest of their life. But we know some other things, especially about self-determination. And this comes from the National Core Indicators. It's a national survey they do with people who receive services in the field. Courtney?
We know that people with more self-determination, more control over their lives, have better life outcomes. They live more independently, have more financial independence, and have better jobs that pay more. And all that's great, but there's more. People with more self-determination are more likely to be included in their communities, spend time with friends, go on dates, have more privacy, and be able to practice their religion. They're also more likely to just have their rights respected. And then, often the most surprising one, people with more self-determination are better able to identify and resist abuse and exploitation. So that's pretty big. If you want to see this information for yourself, we can send you the link to it so that and page numbers so you can find it.
Now, on the other side of things, we know that people who don't get to make their own decisions or who have less self-determination, they just might not develop decision-making skills over the course of their life. They also might not be included in decisions that affect them as they get older. So yes, that can be medical decisions, living arrangements, sometimes decisions as basic as food and clothing. And over time, people who don't get to make their own decisions, or at least be as involved as possible in them, can become passive and develop low self-esteem, and that can affect their physical and mental well-being in very real ways. So, and we have a question for you. We'd love for you to unmute or put responses in the chat. Why do you think that we go to guardianship so often? It's actually increasing across the country, but why do we think that it is the answer?
For safety reasons.
Yeah, we hear safety a lot. Good. What else have you heard?
I think there's just a lack of education around all the options that are available. And then there's this portion of fear. So many times, especially when I was teaching, so many parents would ask me, what would you do if you were in my shoes? And as a teacher, I didn't know all the options that were available, right? So it was hard for me to speak really confidently on the subject. But now that I'm getting involved in supported decision-making network and hearing all these different things, I think there's this lack of education around what is available. So that I don't even know if I'm answering the question, and I might just be blabbing, but I do think there is a lack of education and a lack of understanding of all the available options, and that we're not doing a good job of connecting those resources to people that parents specifically are talking to and trusting because they have those relationships with them. So,
yep, I think that's great. Is there anything in the chat that maybe we missed?
Let's see. We've got people worry they can't do it on their own.
Mhm.
And because parents want to maintain their role in decision making.
Yeah, great. Well, we're going to talk about some of that stuff. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, so some of the misconceptions people have about guardianship is that the parents have to get guardianship for their son or daughter when they turn 18. This is not true. There are many other things you should be trying before guardianship, even at age 18. And this one's big because a recent study revealed that there's this pipeline between the schools and guardianship. Parents are told or encouraged to get guardianship, but are rarely, if ever, given information about all of the less restrictive options. Maybe, like you were talking about, Elizabeth, that the teachers don't have that information. So part of our project is trying to get this information to schools and parents so they know about stuff. Another misconception is if I don't have guardianship, I won't know what's going on. Also not true, and this one's easy. All kinds of releases of information can be used to grant access to important information from schools, medical providers, banks, you name it. But let's look at the biggest misconception people have about guardianship.
And that tends to be that guardianship is going to protect the person from harm, getting arrested, abuse, neglect, exploitation, all those common fears that we have, right? There is actually no study that shows that that's true. There's no study that shows people under guardianship are safer than those who are not. They've done the studies, it just doesn't show that. So sometimes we have these beliefs about guardianship that aren't true. Guardianship has some significant limitations that a lot of people aren't aware of. So guardianship doesn't typically allow us to force someone to do something that they really don't want to do. It doesn't necessarily allow us to keep someone from doing something that they're determined to do. So like you can't usually use guardianship to force someone to take their medication or to force them to attend their medical appointments or keep them from going somewhere or being around somebody that you don't necessarily like, right? It does allow you to take some legal action on their behalf, but you don't necessarily need guardianship to be able to do that. So I usually share a story about being an SSA, a case manager for a county board. And of course, I worked with a lot of people who had guardians, but we had a meeting with this one person. His guardian was there, I was there, his provider was there. And the first thing that he said was, I want to donate my plasma. Well, why did he want to donate his plasma? He was being resourceful. He knew he could get money from donating his plasma. And the guardian kind of rolled her eyes and said, no, you're not donating your plasma. That's silly. We're not even here to talk about that. So he tried to move the meeting along, but he kept bringing it up. I want to donate my plasma. I want to donate my plasma. And she kept dismissing it. We got to the end of the meeting eventually, and she got in her car. The guardian drove away. I went back to the office. This guy walked out of his apartment and he walked down the street and he donated his plasma. Even though the guardian had not given consent for it, there wasn't a whole lot that she could do about it. So again, guardianship doesn't always do what we think it's going to do. It might not even be intended to do those things that we want it to do. It has a very specific purpose. But if it's the only option that we know about, then of course it's going to be the only option that we're going to promote or pursue. Again, sometimes guardianship is the best way to support someone with decision making, because some people, even with support outside of guardianship, are unable to understand information and think about pros and cons and make decisions. Or occasionally there might be an immediate or short-term health or safety risk that calls for somebody else to step in. It's just that we've kind of used guardianship in a heavy-handed way, applying it to all kinds of situations when it might not be the right tool for the situation at hand. Okay, so great. We know that guardianship should be the last resort whenever possible, and we should explore less restrictive alternatives. But what else is there that we can explore? How else can we help people learn and practice decision-making skills? So you may have heard of some of this stuff. We're not going to do a deep dive, just kind of surface level, and we can explore more of that later on. But something like a payee. So this is a person or agency that is assigned to manage a person's benefit money, like Social Security. They make sure that important bills and expenses get paid and that a person has access to the money that's left over for whatever other things they want or need in their life. Now, a good payee can also help a person understand their budget and involve them in the decision-making so that they can learn that skill.
So one of the options is a trust fund. It's a way to keep larger amounts of money without it affecting a person's eligibility for benefits like Medicaid or waiver. They can be set up in different ways, and the money can be saved and then distributed for certain things, ensuring that person has access to what they need without having to take full responsibility for managing all that money.
And it's something a lot of people have heard of, but they don't necessarily understand exactly how it works as a power of attorney, a POA. So that's an arrangement where someone gives decision-making authority for certain things to someone else who they trust. Now, typically what happens is that other person, the agent that I'm giving authority to, doesn't step in to make decisions for me until I don't have the capacity to do it on my own. So in order for me to use a power of attorney, I have to understand what I'm doing. I have to understand that I'm giving somebody else that authority if I don't have capacity. But as long as I understand that, I can revise the power of attorney, I can end the power of attorney. It's only when I lose capacity that I can no longer change those things. But you can use a power of attorney for healthcare and for financial decisions. So for example, maybe a son or daughter wants help to make decisions about their medical treatment, right? Or you think that they're going to need help with those things. Well, they can appoint a parent, anybody else, a family member, as their power of attorney, and that person can have the authority to make medical decisions for them, according to whatever the agreement says.
Supported decision-making is a worldwide movement that has gained a lot of momentum lately. The whole idea is that we all need help to make some decisions sometimes. You or I might ask family, friends, or even experts for help to make decisions, so this is all about doing the exact same thing for people with disabilities. Finding people to help them understand information so they can make and learn from their own decisions instead of just taking it right away. In Ohio, a person can designate what's called chosen representative to make decisions about DD services for them. Again, this is voluntary. Both parties have to agree, but there is an acknowledgement form they sign, and it would only be for services the person receives in the DD system, not for other kinds of decisions.
And then there's limited guardianship. So when most of us think about guardianship, whether we know it or not, we're probably thinking about full guardianship. It's guardian of a person. And it basically removes most of the person's rights to make decisions about their own life. But it doesn't have to be that way. Maybe somebody does need someone else to step in and make certain decisions in their life, but not all decisions. Maybe it's just the medical decisions. Maybe it's just where they're going to live. A limited guardianship allows that person to retain rights to make all the other decisions in their life while someone else steps in to make those specific decisions for them.
So we have a lot of options with technology like Alexa and various apps that help us get around or video chat and check in from our home, and devices that remind us to take our medication. Example I wanted to share is I have THS, so remote support. So when my support staff leaves, the remote support is on, and like they monitor me at night. And basically I don't know if you can see because my screen's blurred, but I have a barn door and above my bedroom door, and when I cross that door, like the sensor will go off, and then it if I'm not back to my room within a certain amount of time, they'll just call and check on me and make sure I'm okay. So and I also have a fall sensor in my living room and also in my bedroom, so if I had a fall, they can sense that and alert my team. That way I don't have to have staff with me to spend the night. I just can use that technology to help me.
And I'll add one other example. I use an Alexa. So if I'm cooking on the stove and I walk out of the kitchen, I will forget that I'm cooking on the stove. I tell myself sometimes that I'm going to remember, and I never do. So when I walk out of the kitchen now, I set a timer on my Alexa for 8 minutes, because I figure like in 8 minutes, I'm not going to burn the house completely down at least. So I walk out, and again, sometimes I think, I didn't need to set the timer, I'm good. But then I get, engrossed in something completely different, forget that I was cooking, but the Alexa goes off and tells me I need to get back to the kitchen. Now, if I didn't have and use an Alexa, there would be plenty of people who would say, I don't think that you should live alone, or at least I don't think that you should cook by yourself, right? But I use this technology to help me make better decisions, to help me live more independently, and there are just so many options out there that we can explore before we look at something like guardianship. And then finally, Courtney talked a little bit about this, but the release of information. It's just a form that allows important information to be shared with you, somebody else, so that you can stay informed, help the other person understand information, their choices, things like that. Just be involved. All right, the nice thing about all of these is that you don't have to just choose one of these. You can choose any combination of them that works for a person. So, all right, maybe I need help with my benefit money, my Social Security. All right, let's start with a payee and see if that does the job, if that works. Okay, fine, but what about making a decision about where I'm going to live? We could use something like supported decision making, which we'll talk more about here in a second, where maybe I just ask someone who I trust, hey, you've lived on your own before. Can you walk me through that process? What things should I think about, consider? What should be important? Can you even help me look for apartments? Okay, but what about not taking my medication, forgetting to take my medication, which is true for me? There's tons of technology that can help me with that. We can start with something as simple as an alarm on my phone, and that usually works for me. But even beyond that, there are all kinds of devices that could help me with it. But let's take a closer look at supported decision making, which is kind of the broad category under which all of this stuff falls, because that's what we're talking about.
Okay, so what is it? What is supported decision making and how do we explain it?
Well, there's a pretty common explanation that comes from a guy named Jonathan Martinez. He's an attorney who's really famous for promoting supported decision making. And he says that, first of all, it's not one size fits all. So there are as many ways to do supported decision making as there are people who can use supported decision making. And we all use supported decision making because it happens when we ask people we trust. So friends, family, neighbors, people that are in communities or groups that we're a part of, church, professionals and experts, to help us understand our choices so that we can make our own decisions. That is basically it, asking for help from others to make decisions when we need it. And that may seem really simple, but because of the way that the DD system has treated people with disabilities for decades, this is still kind of a radical idea. Kind of like Courtney said earlier, when you ask for help to make decisions, maybe buying a new car, changing jobs, important medical stuff, relationship things, finances, you're often seen as wise, mature, responsible. When somebody with a disability needs help to make decisions, we often see that as a vulnerability or something that we need to protect them from. But just because somebody needs help to make some decisions, and we all do sometimes, doesn't mean that their right to make those decisions or other decisions should be taken away. So that's what supported decision making is. It's just about respecting a person's right to make decisions and supporting them to do so in creative ways, person-centered ways, whatever way that they need. And if you want just a little more legitimacy for practicing this, think about it this way. It's protected under the ADA. So if you think of the ADA applying to situations where like somebody's out in public using a wheelchair and they want to get into a public place, a store, a building, but it doesn't have a ramp. Well, we don't turn to that person and say, I'm sorry, you don't have the right to go into that store, right? That's ridiculous. What we say is that they need support or accommodations to be able to get into that store. This is about doing the exact same thing for people with decision making. Just because they need support to make the decision doesn't mean that they don't have the right to make the decision. All right, let's watch one guy's perspective on supported decision making, and we'll come back and talk about just a couple of points from the video.
Supported decision making is that you are making decisions, but you also are actually getting help from other people.
One of the most important things about being human is feeling that you have control over your life and that you understand and feel good about what decisions you're making.
Decisions I would make on my own would be deciding what I want to eat, and also check my mail when I need to, check in with friends, my parents, and my siblings.
We all use supported decision making. Every time you ask for advice from a friend, family member, you may ask advice from a professional when you're making a medical decision.
Some decisions I need help with. Who do I ask that help me make decisions on my own? Would be my peers, my parents, and friends in the community. I look for people that I trust and care about me. Some of the decisions I like to get help with would be definitely medical decisions. Sometimes you may not know what they are, and that there's always good people that can help. My mom helps me make decisions on talking to my doctor. She helps explain what's going on. making decisions to live on my own is important. I prepare for myself for work. I have my clothes that I can lay out on my bed, and then I make that decision on my own to do that. I might make mistakes, but I learn to pick myself up and keep going. My mistake would be drinking too much caffeine. I had to learn to cut back. I'm learning how to cook. So I get to find my own recipes. I find my own meals, or I actually have meals that are left over from dinners or lunch. It feels great that I can live on my own and have my freedom.
Whether we have a disability or not, very well-intentioned supporters can sometimes make decisions about our life or try to really influence decisions about our life.
It's your life. When I make a tough decision, it would be something that might be hard and a challenge, but I'm up to the challenge. But like I said, you have a group behind you. The reason why you have that support group is because they know what you want and they'll like to help support you. If you need help making decisions, go to your full support team and they will have your back.
Alright, so there are just a couple of things that I'd like to kind of draw our attention to in that video. And the first one is the way that that guy folded his clothes. Some of you may have noticed it, some of you may not have noticed it, but it might not be the same way that you fold your clothes. It might not be up to your standards, might not be as neat and tidy as you would typically do it. But does that mean that he can't fold his clothes? Right? So sometimes I co-present with another person who has a child with a disability, and she shares this story. She was talking to a doctor, a pediatrician, just about developmental milestones, things like that. And they had a conversation about the age at which a child can typically dress themselves. And so sometimes we'll ask the audience, hey, what age do you think that children can start dressing themselves? And we hear, 3 years old, 4 years old. What the doctor told her was 2 years old. It's just that you care what they look like. And so you think that they can't do it. And then the other point about that video is the guy cooking carrots. I don't know if you noticed that either, but he just kind of cut up raw carrots and threw them in the oven. I can't imagine that that's going to be delicious. Maybe that's how he likes it. Maybe he just needs to know more about other ways that he can cook carrots, put some seasoning on them, oil or boil them, lots of other things that he could try, right? What we don't do if we're supporting somebody to make decisions is say, whoa, wait, don't put that in the oven. Don't do that. We just help people understand what their options are so that they can make an informed decision for themselves. He might try the carrots and realize he doesn't like them and then doesn't do that anymore. If we had stopped him from doing that, he's not going to learn that lesson. Or he might find that he loves it that way, and then we stopped him from learning that. Okay, so this is just a simple visual to kind of help us understand what supported decision making looks like. So in the center is the decision maker, the person who's asking for help from their supporters who surround them. And those supporters can help in a variety of ways. So that might look like role playing or making pros and cons lists, doing research together, explaining things in a way that makes sense to the other person, or any way that's helpful to them. What supporters do not do is make the final decision. So that right, that authority, it remains with the decision maker. Now, they can even create a supported decision-making agreement, and Courtney is going to show you that here in a little bit. This just identifies their supporters. Here's the other important thing. We talked a little bit about guardianship. So supported decision-making isn't just for people for whom guardianship is a factor or a consideration in their lives. It's for everybody. Yes, you can and should use supported decision-making even when guardianship is involved. But the things that we're talking about go way beyond that. So this is about supporting anybody to have more self-determination and live better lives.
Sometimes we view capacity as all or nothing. Either someone has capacity to make their own decisions or they don't. We do this with other things in the disability field too, like higher low functioning. First example I wanted to share with that is I normally wait till we get to my story of how I've used SDM, but I'm autistic, and when I've started disclosing that, sometimes I get kind of weird reactions. And one of those weird reactions is people tell me I'm so high functioning. And while in a sense, yes, that is true, the things I need help with and the level of support I need depend on the situation, and decision making is the exact same way. So capacity isn't static, it isn't the same all the time. Our capacity to make decisions depends on the situation. What kind of decision is it? Is it something we know a lot about, or is it something that's new and confusing to us? When are we being asked to make a decision? Under a lot of pressure, sometimes unnecessary pressure, or with enough time to think and process the information?
So instead of that all or nothing approach, it is sometimes helpful to think of capacity more like this. There are going to be some decisions in life we feel well prepared to make, where we might not need any help. You know, we're already familiar, experienced with these things. We're confident about making these decisions. And then there are other decisions where we're going to need to ask for help, guidance. We're not as experienced, not as knowledgeable, things we might not know as much about, or they're confusing to us, or there are nuances, different degrees of ability here in need for support. What this doesn't mean is that we can't do it, only that the support we need to do it is going to look different depending on the situation. All right, so now we want to talk a little bit about what it looks like in real life. So we got the principle out of the way, right? But when you're doing this, what does it look like for people? Well, first, we need to help people understand that they can ask for help. So here are some questions that a lot of people don't know they can even ask that we want to make sure people are aware of. Number one, do you need help with the decision, right? So sometimes you're going to need help with the decision. Sometimes you're not going to need help with the decision. But do you even know that you can ask for help with this? Do you have all the information that you need? Sometimes when we're doing a training for like students, we'll use an example of a doctor telling you that you need to get surgery. And I'll say, all right, doctor says you need to get surgery. What are you going to do? Well, I don't know. What kind of surgery, right? What's the recovery going to be like? What are the risks? Yeah, exactly. You need more information before you make that decision. So sometimes you just have to ask for more information. Other times, you need to ask for more time to think about it. And I think, Courtney, you're going to talk about this one.
Yeah. Sometimes we have a lot to think about the process before we make a decision. We can feel rushed or under pressure to make the decision, but we can almost always ask for more time to think about it. So, real quickly, I wanted to ask you guys in the audience, if you've ever felt rushed or pressure to make a decision before you were ready.
Yes, I have.
Do you have an example you can think of?
The best I can remember is when I was younger, math wasn't my strong point, and my dad wanted me to do math problems in my head. And I would even try and draw in the air so I could like mentally see the math problem, and he wouldn't want me to do that. And so I got really flustered and didn't love that. You've got a couple more yeses in the chat too.
Good.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of people have had that experience. One of the responses that Josh was telling me about that he's gotten in the past is that people can do rush at the drive-thru, like when you're trying to, if you've never been to a certain restaurant before and you're in the drive-thru and you're trying to figure out what you want to order, that can be stressful, and also sometimes that can even happen at a sit-down restaurant too. So, and some other times, people might feel pressured is in a IEP or ISP meeting. So that's a situation where you might ask for several different kinds of help to make decisions. Like if you don't understand what's being talked about, if they're using words you don't understand, well, you can just ask them to say it differently or explain it to you. And it might not always seem like it, but you can ask for more time to think about it before you answer. Maybe you need a couple more minutes, or maybe you need a couple days or longer to think about it, especially to talk to other people you trust. When you get older, there are going to be times when someone puts a piece of paper in front of us and asks us to sign it. You may need to ask for time to look over it and think about it. You have the right to do that. Something else to think about is whether or not someone is telling you what to do. Now there are going to be times where we just follow directions or do what someone tells us. Maybe we're at school and a teacher's telling us what to do, or if you're at work and your boss is telling you what to do. But other times, people might try to tell us what to do when it's not their decision to make, it's ours. So we can ask ourselves, does this person who's telling me what to do know what they're talking about? Do they have my best interest in mind? And then we can decide whether or not they're to do what they're telling us to. Another thing to keep in mind is, do you know if this is a decision you can change your mind about? Sometimes we can change our mind later, and other times we make a decision and carry it out. There's not really an option to change that, except to make different decisions moving forward. But in many cases, you can change your mind later. Here's an easy example. You're trying different foods or drinks. Have you ever mixed different flavors to make a drink or a slushie, or been really creative about what you put on your pizza or sandwich? If you taste it and you don't like it, well, you can change your mind and try something different. But we can also change our mind about bigger stuff. Maybe we choose to trust someone and they weren't honest with us. We can decide not to trust them moving forward. Or the opposite. We don't think we can trust someone, but then we get to know them and we decide we can trust them. That's changing our mind too. And it's also important to keep in mind to know all your options before you make a decision. Like if you thought that the only options you could have for lunch were either hamburgers or chicken nuggets, and then later on you find out that pizza was the option, you might feel like disappointed because you didn't know all the options that were available to you.
All right, so one of the questions that we have found is incredibly impactful when we're doing this kind of work or helping people try to implement this is, what are we trying to accomplish, especially when the issue of guardianship comes up? Because if we take the time to ask that question and then just dig a little deeper on it, often we're going to find that what we're trying to accomplish isn't going to be accomplished by guardianship. Remember, guardianship doesn't necessarily protect people, right? But we know that this is a sensitive issue, one with strong feelings, fear, and anxiety. So the more time that we take to listen to people's fears and anxieties, dig a little deeper, and focus on what we're trying to accomplish, the outcome, the more likely we're going to find those less restrictive alternatives that are options that maybe we didn't know about before.
Now, SDM should definitely be used as alternative to guardianship. We also can and should use it alongside guardianship. Guardians have the authority to make decisions for a person, but that doesn't necessarily mean they have to or even should exercise that authority with every decision. In fact, and this is an entirely different presentation, the state of Ohio says that whenever possible, the guardian is supposed to defer to the decision that the person under guardianship wants to make, as long as it's not going to result in harm. So this slide is what we want to get away from. It's not either or. These things are not mutually exclusive, and they don't have to be at odds with one another. We can do both. And that doesn't mean go ahead and get guardianship even if it's not needed, because we can still use SDM. We should still treat guardianship as a last resort, but if it is in place, maybe for those people who are already under guardianship, it can be supplemented with SDM in a lot of situations. It can look more like this. There are many options to support someone who is under guardianship to make their own decisions. They may need more or less support, depending on the person or the decision. But we should be looking for those opportunities instead of assuming that a guardian needs to make every decision. In many cases, it should look like the guardian supporting the decision the person wants to make by giving formal consent for it. I have used supported decision making in my own life. I just never knew what it was called. I just knew there are things sometimes I have a hard time understanding, or that I need to talk out with someone first in order to make my decision. An example would be when I normally go to doctor's appointments, my staff will go with me. So they'll help me by just writing down what the doctor is saying, and also like I'll write down things that I want to bring up, and then they'll fill in any information I might not know or might be missing. And then another thing they'll do is that if the doctor has explained things quickly, they'll explain it to me in a way I can understand. My stepmoms also helped me if I wanted her advice on what to say to a friend. For example, one of a friend I knew through best buddies, her mom approached me and asked her if I'd like to be her daughter's roommate. And I talked about it with my stepmom, and I figured that I didn't really know her that well. And also I kind of, I wanted to keep living in my apartment, and so I decided not to do a roommate. And another example is that my dad made an Excel spreadsheet for my budget. So if I go over in a category, it would go red. And then if I notice that I keep going over a category, like if I keep sending over my money in groceries, I will email my dad and we will adjust my budget. My coworker Lynn has helped me a lot in work situations. She normally helps me figure out my hours for work. As I mentioned earlier, I'm autistic and I need routine, but also have trouble seeing the big picture and planning for changes in routine. So something that Lynn will help me with is we'll go over my Outlook calendar together and see if I have any like meetings or committees that I have to plan for, and just trying to make sure I, get everything done that I need to do. And another thing that I wanted to mention is that I've recently started doing team meetings with my dad and my support coordinator, and also with my provider agency. And I feel like those team meetings have really helped everybody be on the same page. And also if I do have any issues, I can just bring those up in the meeting, and then we can work together to figure out, okay, how can we work together to resolve that?
All right, but how do we know if somebody is able to make their own decisions? Well, technically that's something that like a doctor and a judge might weigh in on, but there are lots of things that we can do more informally to figure out what kind of support a person might need. So this is a tool from Charting a Life course. They used to call it the Stoplight tool, but it is actually called the Tool for Exploring Decision-Making Supports. And it is divided into different life domains or life areas. The one you can see there is healthy living. So what it does is it takes each life area and asks a series of questions that you can respond to. It's, can I make this decision all by myself without any support? Can I make this decision if I get the right kind of support? Or is this the kind of decision that right now, at least, I need somebody else to make for me? So if you go through this and it's really just a one-pager, front and a back, you will get a really good sense of the kind of support that a person might need at that point in their life with decision-making. It's also really important, going back to what Courtney said about capacity, to make sure that we don't just do this as a one and done. well, we did this when they were 18, so that's it for the rest of their life. People's capacity is going to change. They're going to learn things. They're going to grow, especially if they get the right kind of support. So revisiting this, because the support they need is going to be different later on.
Or you might look for other resources that are out there. As Josh mentioned earlier, a person can create a supported decision-making agreement. It's basically a document that identifies who the person wants to help them make decisions and which decisions they want help with. We don't have to use an agreement, but in some cases, the person or the team feels better about the arrangement if it's documented and they plan to present it to medical professionals or something, and they want something with an official appearance. This is what one might look like. So this is the first page, and it basically says, I want help to make decisions, but I'm not giving up my right to make them. And then page 2 is where we identify the people we want to help us and how to get a hold of them when we need support. And then page 3 is we can decide what kind of support they give or what decisions they help with. We might ask one person for help with medical decisions and a different person for help with work-related decisions. And then page 4, this is where everyone signs it to make it official.
All right, so we're gonna finish up here talking about risk, because that's another important part of decision making, thinking about risk. And the truth is that there is risk in every single decision that we make, but not all risk is created equally. Sometimes, though, it can be really easy, or we can get in the habit of focusing on the hypothetical worst case scenarios when we talk about risk. And that can prevent us from doing and trying new things. So this is a risk matrix, and it's pretty simple. On the left-hand side, we ask ourselves, well, how likely is this bad thing to actually happen? And then across the top is, all right, let's say it does happen. How bad would it typically be if it does happen? So, for example, I worked with someone who wanted to play recreational kickball on a team, and half of his team was really worried about him getting hit in the face with a kickball. They didn't want him to play. Well, if we use something like a risk matrix to help us have the conversation, we can be a little more objective about it. So let's ask ourselves, on the left-hand side, how likely is it that he'll get hit in the face with a kickball if he plays? Well, it's possible, right? If you play a sport, you might get hurt playing that sport. But if he does get hit in the face with a kickball, how bad's it going to be? It's probably negligible to minimal in most cases. So the risk there is where those two things intersect. We're looking at low, maybe moderate risk there. And so you can use this tool for conversations of any kind that involve risk. The other thing we want to point out, though, is if you take a look at this table, ask yourself where growth happens personally or in life, because it's probably not in that low range. Because I don't know where you are right now, but if you're going to drive home or drive to the store, you're probably not going to get out of your car and think, man, that was a great, powerful drive. I am a new person after that drive, right? But is there risk in driving? Yeah, every time we get in a car, there's a risk. But it's relatively low risk. We don't grow from those things. We do grow from trying new things that maybe are a little bit uncomfortable, but help us have new experiences. So if we always jump to the hypothetical worst case scenario and then use that as a reason for people not to try things, what we're essentially doing is preventing them from growing in life. All right, so let's end with the happy safe grid. This is just another activity that we can do that helps us talk about risk. Courtney, you want to introduce it?
Yeah. So safety is one of those sensitive words or issues. It's important to be safe, but it's also important to be happy. But sometimes we prioritize safety above everything else. This tool, the Happy Safe Grid, is a great way to explore all the options and balance being happy with being safe. So we're gonna share with you a story about Evan, and then you can help us figure out what Evan's options are for being safe, but also being happy.
All right, so I worked with Evan, not his real name, but worked with him several years ago. And Evan was a guy who's really ambitious. He was in his early to mid-20s at the time, loved to have fun and try new things and be around people. And whenever he was out in public, he'd like just flash his smile and people would gravitate towards him. It was really adventurous. Evan also has a very rare disorder that causes him to try and hurt himself. He doesn't want to do it, but he can't always help it. So he chooses to have wrist and ankle restraints on his wheelchair, and he spends most of his time in his wheelchair. It just helps him feel safer. Now, he can get out of those restraints if he really wants to, but he likes to have them there. Now, when Evan is experiencing intense emotions, when he's really frustrated or upset, or sometimes when he's really, really happy, he might be more likely to hurt himself. So again, he doesn't want to do it, but he can't necessarily help it. Well, at one of his meetings, he said, "Hey, everybody, I want to go skydiving." Well, his dad, who's guardian, immediately said, "No, you're not going skydiving. Come on." So if we pretend that we are Evan's team, knowing what little we know about him, the way we use the happy safe grid is draw it just like it looks, label it happy, unhappy, safe, and unsafe, and then start having a conversation about what the other options are. So if Evan doesn't go skydiving, what are some other things that he could do or that we could try as a team? And we're going to plot them on here. And when we do this, we invite everybody's perspective. We don't dismiss any of them. We plot every single suggestion up there. So you guys tell us either in a chat or by unmuting, if not actually skydiving, what are some other things that he might be able to try? Or if you were a team member, what would be some things that you would say? Maybe you don't want him to do any of it, but let us know so we can plot this.
Someone in the chat said indoor skydiving.
All right, so here's how it works. Indoor skydiving. We first ask how happy or unhappy would Evan be with indoor skydiving, keeping in mind that the happiest is actually jumping out of that plane. All right, so I know Evan, he'd be pretty happy with that. So we might put a mark right here. And then we ask, how safe or unsafe would indoor skydiving be? And this is where you have a conversation. There's not necessarily one right answer. You just invite perspectives. And so, people might decide, well, I've been indoor skydiving. I've seen it done. It's relatively safe. Let's put it right here. All right, where these 2 points intersect, you're going to put a dot and you're just going to label it. And for the sake of time, I'm just going to use initials for this stuff. IS for indoor skydiving. So you see where it falls. Pretty happy and pretty safe. What are some other options that you can think of or other perspectives that a team member might give?
A roller coaster?
All right, roller coaster. So now we have indoor skydiving to compare it to. So how happy or unhappy would Evan be with a roller coaster? Probably still on the happy side of things, right? But not as happy as indoor skydiving because it's the closest thing to skydiving so far. So here. And how safe or unsafe would a roller coaster be? Again, just for the sake of this activity, we're going to plot things, but you would have a conversation about this and kind of come to an agreement. So maybe it is a little less safe than indoor skydiving. I don't know. You do the same thing. Plot it. And this is going to be R for roller coaster. All right, let's do a couple more and we'll tell you how everything ended up with Evan. What else could he try? What have you tried? Or have you been in meetings where somebody was kind of a naysayer and they said, no, you can't do that. You can only do X, Y, Z.
If somebody said a flight on a small passenger plane.
All right, flight on a small plane. So again, you see how it works. Where's the flight rank on happy or unhappy? He's probably going to be pretty happy, but he might be upset that he can't jump out of the plane if he's up in the plane. So it's going to fall somewhere here. It might fall somewhere here. So you plot it and you put plane. So same thing. Anything else in the chat, Courtney?
Yeah, I don't know how to say it though. Supported I don't
Repelling.
know. Rambling?
Repelling. So I think that's like going up or down a wall or a mountain with a cable to support you. Is that correct, person who suggested that?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
It's like rock climbing, but with somebody helping and with a harness.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. I've
So
never heard of that before.
yeah, so that's the other thing about these conversations when you use these tools is you learn about options you didn't know existed before, right? So we could plot all of these things on here and you could fill up this chart. Sometimes what we hear in meetings are things like, he can just watch some YouTube videos of people skydiving. All right, well, how happy or unhappy is he going to be? You ain't like that. You don't watch other people doing it. But how safe is it for him to watch the YouTube videos? Relatively safe. So, that might fall here for YouTube. Thanks for bearing with me trying to draw and write with just a touchpad on the laptop. But then let's plot what Dad said. Remember, Dad, guardian, he said, no, you're never going to go skydiving. So how happy or unhappy is Evan going to be if he never goes skydiving? He's probably going to be pretty unhappy, right? But, and I'd like to hear from you guys on this one, how safe or unsafe do you think it is for Evan to just never go skydiving?
It's probably pretty safe.
Yeah. So let's start at pretty safe, but then let's keep talking about the fact that when Evan gets really upset or experiences intense emotions, he is more likely to hurt himself.
So that move it over to the unsafe column.
Yeah, it might end up not all the way unsafe, but a little more in the unsafe, right? So what we initially thought was going to make him unhappy, but at least we're keeping him safe, is probably more unhappy and a little bit unsafe. Well, we don't want to do anything that falls in unsafe and unhappy, right? We want to stick to things that are happy and safe. So we've identified at least 3 or 4 options up here that we could choose from. So here's what happened with Evan. He ended up going indoor skydiving. We had a meeting 3 years later after talking about this for a while. And his dad was there, his mom was there, Evan and his provider, his staff was there, and Evan had to go to the bathroom, so staff took him. And Dad turned and said, I think we finally get it. Again, 3 years later, we finally get it because we, Mom and Dad, we ride motorcycles. And if somebody told us that we couldn't ride motorcycles because it was dangerous, we would just laugh at them and like get on our bikes and ride away. And I think my son wants a similar experience, just being adventurous and trying something where there is a little risk involved. It's part of what living is about, right? So we found a place in Chicago and he went, and there were 2 staff at the indoor skydiving place. One went in the tunnel with him on his left side, holding an arm and a leg, and the other on his right side, holding an arm and a leg to keep him from hurting himself. And they all floated up and down in that wind tunnel, and he loved it, and he had the biggest smile on his face. But guess who else had the biggest smile on his face? Dad did. Yep, because we were able to have a conversation about decisions that might involve risk and find something that satisfied both happy and safe. All right, we are just trying to help people change the conversation, know what the options are. So people with disabilities, parents, educators, service providers, county boards, really anybody. And it means that we have to start talking about things a little bit differently. So when the issue of guardianship comes up, just make sure you're asking, all right, well, what are we trying to accomplish with guardianship? Because if you ask it and then you explore it, you will probably find the best approach, and it may not always be guardianship. There might be something less restrictive. And then the other way we can change the conversation is just by promoting self-determination and opportunities for people to make decisions for themselves, have more control over their lives for everybody, but especially among younger people. The younger we start learning how to make decisions, the less likely something like guardianship might be needed as they become adults, and just the more confident they're going to be in their decision making. So just introduce those perspectives. I like to reference the Maya Angelou quote that we do the best we can until we know better. And when we know better, try to do better. So as we give information, we hope that people feel like they know a little better and that they can try some new things.
So does is a lot of information, but we'd like to know, do you have any questions or concerns that we can talk there?
Hiya. I just have to say, sorry, my lighting isn't good because I'm sitting behind a window here, but I've enjoyed this conversation so much. And Courtney, I think your perspective has been so helpful in this session. I have an almost 18-year-old daughter with autism, so I know very much the struggle of giving her the freedom and exploration, and also like the struggle of wanting to protect. So I think, again, I think this is just such a great conversation, and I really enjoyed your perspective here this is the first time we've had our own individual with their own disability to talk about it to us, again, as parents and as providers. And I just think that that has been the best thing about this series so far. So thank you, Courtney, for being open and vulnerable and just sharing. And because I know, yeah, you've probably been through it, but to be here and to speak is just awesome. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And I do want to say that our county actually took something from you guys from Hamilton County. We do a project called Futures Now, which is where we help parents and people with disabilities prepare for the future and prepare for like who's going to help them after their parents pass away. And one of the things that I do is I get to share like what my parents did to help me, you know, be as independent as I can be. And I really enjoy getting to do that. And I know that the parents have said that it really helps them. So I'm very thankful that I get to do that. So.
Well, you have found a great role as an advocate and speaker. So well done.
Thank you.
Yes. Anybody else have a comment or a question for Courtney or Josh?
I'll share one more thing, because it didn't come up today, but occasionally it does, where we hear, this is all great, but it doesn't apply to the person I'm thinking of because they have more intense needs, or they don't communicate using words, or whatever it is, right? And so I usually just respond to that with a quote from an attorney that I know that was talking about supported decision-making years ago. And she said that anyone who can express their desires, that they like something or they don't, that they want something or they don't, no matter how they do that, they can shake their head, they can blink their eyes, they can point to a picture, they can make gestures. Anybody who can express that they like, don't want, is capable of making at least some decisions in their life. We just have to present the options to them in a way that they can understand and respond to. So let's not confuse the need for different kinds of support for a lack of capacity.
And Andrea, what did you put in the chat?
Courtney had brought up the Future Is Now. In Hamilton County, our team does the Future Is Now, and I attached a flyer. And we have both in-person and Zoom sessions for that, and we do it throughout the year. So if somebody can't make these October sessions, we'll do them throughout the year, and we put them on our agency website.
Yeah, we kind of stole you guys' idea and just.
No, that's
but
great.
It was really good though, so we're like, we need to do that too. Let's do it.
Yeah, that's great.
If you want additional support or information, please feel free to reach out to either one of us. I'll share it just because I'm at a conference right now and we've been promoting it and doing it. So one of the creative ways that we have found to support people in practicing decision making, we actually created a board game called Dungeons and Dragons and Decisions. And it's just a choose your own adventure game where one person reads a story and then another person or group of other people, adventurers, they have to make decisions in that story. And depending on the decisions they make, they experience different outcomes or different stories. And so it's sort of a safe space for them to practice decision-making and to talk through pros and cons and get other people's perspectives and even take some risks, that aren't going to impact their life long-term. So just thinking creatively about ways to support people. So that's something that we also have, but it's just part of thinking creatively about how to support people.
Wonderful. Josh and Courtney, will you share your slide deck with me?
Yep.
you could email it to me, and I'll put a PDF of it on our site.
Sure thing.
All right. So thank you so much for joining us and speaking about this great topic, and really getting people to think differently about how we do make decisions. We have a family member experiencing the beginning stages of Alzheimer's, and I can see how this can even that happy, safe, unhappy, safe tool, unsafe tool can help us talk to her about some things. So I'm really excited to look at that. And just as a reminder, if we've got still some parents on, I'm going to put a link in the chat to the Padlet. And like I said earlier, this is where our Zoom, anything from tonight will be here on the October 3rd column, probably tomorrow. And this link on the is on the Padlet is also on the s'more that was sent out to share all the information about it. So there's a link there. And then our next parent session is in November. And we are excited to see you all again. Let me see. Can I find our topic for November real quick? So it's November 7th, and it is going to be on the transition roadmap and how families can be more involved in IEP team meetings. So we'll be looking forward to that topic and to seeing you all again. Thank you so much for joining us, and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.